Hello, welcome back with the Rhetoric Reviewed podcast. It's been about 2 to 3 weeks, and I've spent the last 2 to 3 weeks, as I said, thinking of new ways to approach this channel as I've ran out of novel ideas that I alone can spend 20 to 30 minutes on. So we're going to be doing a bit of a policy change. So instead of having daily uploads of 20-minute, 30-minute videos where I explain my own ideas, I'll be trying to explore different forms of ways I can explore and express my own ideas. For example, shorter form videos at around 3 to 5 minutes. However, if I do ever have a certain revelation of some kind, I will be expressing it in this sort of video form as well. So let's jump right into it with polarization. So first, let's go over what polarization means, right? Polar, what does that mean? Poles. So if you think about it, the Earth, right, the North Pole and the South Pole. So it's about opposite ends. It's about how opposite ends interact and how there's different things move towards those opposite ends, right? Polarization. So from breaking down the words, we can really sort of find out how this came to be and what it might represent in our political society. So polarization has always been a contentious topic, especially in America, where we've basically almost always had a two-party system ever since the conception of the first-party system, with the Federalists and Anti-Federalists in the critical period of America, right, when we're founding the Constitution. We've had this sort of unique identity where we have this polarization built into our system. Now, of course, it's not always been like that. We've had times of one-party dominance, for example, in the 1820s, and we've also had times of extreme disagreement as of now, and maybe even during the Vietnam War. So, why does this matter? So, polarization, we might think of it as just, a natural force of history. However, it's anything but that. Polarization is something that each period of history has to contend with and get it sorted out. We only see it as a brief fleeting problem because every society that has succeeded has managed to at least weed out the problems of major polarization and create some sort of unilateral agreement within its society, right? No society can function without a fundamental idea of unity, or at least one founding fundamental idea. In America, that's our pursuit of democracy, freedom, and spreading American ideals, right? This is going to be what makes America America. However, when we don't have enough political agreement, we not only are unable to achieve these ends, we can no longer use these ends to actually keep the populace unified and keep America functioning as a society. So what would be a time, for example, in history where polarization has been, uniquely negative for a society? Well, that would be for in America, that would just be the Civil War, right? It's no better example of polarization within a society, right? Although you could argue that America wasn't a unified society back then, and the South and the North are, unique societies. You might make that argument, but at least within the structure of the American government, secession itself is the biggest example of how polarization might go wrong. A polarization crisis, if you will. And that gets us into the status quo. So we see a major political polarization change in the last 10, 20, 30 years with, most importantly, the youngest group. So before we start off, I'll be focusing on the youths, but this is a problem that is pervasive among society, in society, right? It's a generational trend, right? Ever since the end of the Second World War, the world has been liberalizing pretty quickly, right? And this has been a trend of over every generation. However, it's only becoming more serious in the young generation because there's a severe split off and a severe, heightening of the rate of polarization compared to previous generations, and we'll get into those very soon. So let's get into some current polarization stats on the screen here, and if for those who are not watching, I'll try to read them out for you. So we have since 2002 a self-identified position of 18 to 29-year-olds on the political spectrum, with 0 being very liberal and 10 being very conservative. So in 2002, the male and female demographics were both about the same, right about 4.7, which is on the conservative side compared to now, of course, but it is leading liberal in terms of policy, right? And since then, we've seen a severe change in difference, the delta, right? Which is that the self-identified position of females has now become 4.2, significantly more liberal than their previous counterparts since 2002. And this is an average of 20 rich or wealthy nations, so it reflects American demographics. And then you have the male demographic, which went from, again, about 4.7 into 4.9, so slightly leaning conservative, but only a delta of about 0.1. So this is significant because once one gender is feeling or is getting more polarized and is leading to this sort of political imbalance we see today. And we have more statistics to back this up, which shows that in America specifically, since the 1970s, there's been a significant increase in both female liberals and male conservatives. This is coming out of, again, for context, 1970s. This is about the end of the the civil rights movement into the sort of the second feminist movement, or second wave of feminism, I believe. So on the graph here, you can very clearly see that female liberal numbers went down briefly in the 1980s and then climbed back up to the same level as the 1970s. Meanwhile, male conservatives, which peaked at the 1990s, came down a little bit before restoring its levels to 2020s. So even though the male conservative bias is less, or the delta is less, right? It's changed a less amount. It's still a change in one direction, which is mirrored by the other. So, like, here's the thing. If I go forward and you go backwards, the distance between us is the double of what I move, or the double of what you move, right? So this is more scary because not only are the two different genders on average going to different sides, they're going at different sides at the same rate, or at least increasing rates, meaning that the total difference in ideology numerically is going to be increasing. And this matters, I think, because there's a lot of problems with politics, because we always talk about how, oh, don't bring up politics. Politics doesn't matter. But politics is absolutely a dominating factor when it comes to matters of family. One of the biggest advices that I've seen just propagated around life in general and in my personal life is that politics is the number one decider when it comes to stability of marriages, because especially when kids are involved, it's up to you, the parents, right, to decide what you think should be the values you instill within your children and the values you hold as a household. And if you can't agree on that, there's a very likely chance that either there's going to be an unsuccessful marriage, or on the other hand, you're not going to not get married in the first place because you don't see a viable solution or a viable partner which you can actually share a value with. Now, of course, this isn't always the case, right? But as an overwhelming majority, if you share your values with your partner, you're going to have a much better time getting a easy way into parenthood. So that being said, this is a severe issue, right? If you have two sides, if you have a whole generation of people, if you have the whole mountain of people unable to agree on politics, and that is based on gender alone, now you see a bit of a problem happening. Of course, not everyone, it's not 100 to 100, right? It's not 50-50, but the increasing rate is definitely reflective in the amount of like for both sides, like for example, the loneliness epidemic, and that is definitely a worrying problem. So anyways, let's go into why this is happening, right? The why matters a lot, and against which groups the divide is actually happening. So again, we've already discussed that this is mostly happening among youth, and that the divide was most evident when compared against, previous eras. Because we're not living in any time of serious contention right now. We don't have, right? By all means, we have gender equality. By all means, we have peace, economic stability. No, maybe not economic stability, but maybe we have all these institutional measures to sort of ordain some sort of level of equality. However, that's not always going to be the case. In fact, technically, right now, women are performing better at schools when it comes, especially the younger levels, due to the fact that women or girls, I guess, mature faster. And this has put boys at a severe disadvantage when it comes to college degree attainment or high school success. Not a huge amount, but there is a trend that's happening. So the reason why I think this is happening is because there's a sort of, I guess, backlash to recent social movements, which may or may not be in its totality, but also is representative of what these social movement says about people. So I guess if we want to start about this, this will be an extension of the pre and post woke ideology, which places a serious emphasis on I guess what you call like the whole white cis heterosexual male, whatever that whole moniker is. Men feel left out and they lean conservative. Women feel equally left out, so they lean liberal. But of course, these are two different lenses. So how did this come about? How is this group divide happening? So let's move back a little bit and discuss how this quote unquote woke ideology came into into existence in the first place. So if you start this is very basic understanding, by the way. I am still a learning scholar when it comes to this stuff. However, let's start back with Karl Marx, right? He is the father of, as we know it, socialism, communism, bit of critical theory as well, if you want to talk about it. And in his original works in Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto, he spoke a lot, of course, about economics, but more about power structures, right? So he viewed society and history as power structures. You would divide, and he, recounted history about how like feudalism and slave societies, all these different societies had different power structures, and how those power structures defined those societies. So the next natural extension of that was during the, I guess what you call like the Foucault in the 20th century, power structures became an extremely power structures became an extremely good way to determine history. It became a new lens. If anything, it served as a lens to look at history. And this is where stuff like critical thinking came about, where, to be fair, and I think it's very valuable to be critical about the way we view history, because power has indicated and has dictated a lot about what we know and the mainstream story even. And this is because, well, to be fair, right, the history is written by the winner, and those with power are going to be the winners, and therefore you need to look at history and you get to look at modern events critically to make sure you're getting the full story. However, the continuation in what I believe is called postmodernism of this is that power relationships are defining society, and this creates an oppressed and oppressor hierarchy, where the oppressed is of course under, and the oppressed is above and the oppressor is below, right? You have the victim and the victimizer. Why I think this makes sense or is even palatable here, or is a great way to encapsulate the Western audience, is because it's an extension of a Christian ideal that we're all used to, the underdog story, right? To help the downtrodden. Even Jesus himself, by all means, despite being the Son of God, was born to a poor heritage and rose to that position, right? His father was a carpenter, and the carpenter's son is the Son of God. Also, he helps the poor. All of these ideas are not unique to Catholicism and Christianity. However, it is a mainstream idea. Anyways, that being said, so based on this victim and victimizer class, that's where I think most of this was born. That you need to put people into categories where they are victim or a victimizer, and then based on those categories, if you are someone of this class, right? If your identity is of one of these classes, you are going to be given certain societal privileges, or you should be given justice in some sort. So it's a bit muddled. I don't think I can really explain it very well, nor do I understand it all of the way, but that's how I see the birth of this sort of polarizing mindset, right? This whole mindset of you versus me, and how, honestly, to be fair, there's so much content out there. There's so much media out there which pits the two genders against each other. And with the amount of media consumption that is being done by Generation Z in comparison to every other generation in the past, of course you're going to get more polarization, right? Because you're getting more media, and a lot of this media is going to be polarizing because that's what attracts views, as we all know, right? You have your kill all men, you have all your Andrew Tates, you have all these people from different sides who buy into this sort of intersectional wokeism, where like if you're a part of this group, you're being marginalized in some sort of way, right? And that's going to be either people who still believe that women are doing terribly in colleges and education and how they're so behind, or they're going to be that people who believe that because of that women are going ahead and that men are falling behind, that all these things is just examples of political messaging that pits each side against each other. And this is a almost uniquely youth issue, because even though this sort of idea exists, right, this sort of intersectionalism where like you need to be a part of some identity, and that identity is equally a part of you, and if that identity is attacked, you, the individual, are attacked. That's what I think is so harmful about this, right? That's what's being politically messaged, and that's what's going to drive extremism and polarization, because that's essentially what the end result of such things is going to be. Right? If you're messaging on a subliminal level en masse to one demographic that the other side is out to get you, or that you're being disadvantaged, or that you're being discriminated against, of course you're going to keep listening. You're going to keep listening and keep consuming data and content and media from one side, and that just drives it even further down one side. So like what I also think that's especially bad is because think about it, right? We've all heard about the algorithm and echo chambers. So once you've already once you get into a echo chamber, once you get into one sphere, you're not leaving, right? I personally have been a part of 2 different political organizations, and not organizations, but of affiliations, and now I am, I believe, truly of neither. But it's very, very difficult to actually hear out the other side and really hear why you're wrong, right? It's really hard to hear why you're wrong more than why the other side is right. That's what I think is the real issue we're seeing here. And this is definitely reflected, again, with the trends among the youth. It's really been recently that these statistics have gone haywire. Between 2015 and 2020, there was a almost 10% delta change when it comes to female liberalism, and in the same time frame, there was a 0.5 delta change with conservatives. So with males, I mean, to the conservative side. So I would, if I knew more about it, I would love to talk about the like global impact of this, right, in like different countries. But I do see that like UK and South Korea and Germany also have the same issue, except that everyone seems to be leaning conservative in or liberal rather in South Korea, but it's just at a greater rate again for the females. So let's go back to the future, right? Why does this matter? So I've rambled on and yapped a lot about, why this might be, why this is happening, what's happening, but how is this going to go on in the future, and why do I think that this may or may not be a problem? So to start, I want to go on and say that a lot of what, even despite everything I said, a lot of this is not going to actually impact your real day life, because people are, again, not individuals, not males or females, right? People are individuals first, I believe, and that makes it so you're going to find people who you can agree with. You're going to find friends, partners, family. You're going to find all these things that I believe transcend any identity you might have, right? For the same reason that you are going to find that you're going to see people who have certain political ideologies that are still able to be friends with other people, right? You might, like, folks, for example, you might be able to full on disagree with whether or not gay people are able to marry, yet still have gay friends. Because individuals matter first and not politics. And that's what it comes down to. But does this still indicate an overall trend? Absolutely. So while you're in everyday life, of course, your advice wouldn't be to fall into this political extremism and this polarization. It is important to recognize that this is a sort of crisis that we need to address, and if it keeps going worse, we're going to see serious problems. However, the nature of polarization is also that it's self-correcting. Once it gets to a point where this isn't going to be tenable for society, something major is going to change, right? Historically, that's been revolution to make it easier to live, to have children, to take care of your children. Or it's going to be just a natural sorting method where those people who are able to actually reproduce are going to be the ones that are the least polarized, or at least agree. And that's going to lead, lead into 2 different worlds. And these are different ways that it might fix on its own, but is there a way to fix it on our, is there an active way we can do to fix it? And the answer is yes, we can. And the way we do this is by having more conversation. This applies to both sides, but when it comes to having, agreeable disagreement, and when it comes to agreeing to disagree, this it's very easy to do. It's very difficult to do, but very easy to learn. And by making sure that everyone's in conversation with each other, making sure that disagreeing sides are able to see each other as individuals, not as left and right, and liberal and conservative, I believe that's the only way that polarization can be fixed. And the first step to do that is hop off the TikToks, the Instagram Reels, and to really try to see the world for what it is and talk to real life people about political issues instead of just taking in whatever the media says. Everyone's a bit guilty of this, right? Even myself, of course, but I feel like the very least we can do as a society is talk it out. So if you have any thoughts on this, it's a bit of a more rambly video. I don't really know what I was talking about half the way. But if you have any thoughts, comments, criticisms, or critiques, or you want to discuss anything further, drop it in the comment section down below, and I'll be excited to talk. Thank you, and it's been the Rhetoric Reviewed.